You're watching Citizen Extra. We will be talking to Wilkista Nyabwa very shortly. She's in Kisumu County. We're staying with the post-election mood across the country as we approach the swearing-in ceremonies, the respective swearing-in ceremonies in different elected positions. Let's cross over to Wilkista Nyabwa in Kisumu County for an update on what's happening in that part of the country.
Greetings from sunny Kisumu, Lilian Muli. It is another day here in Kisumu County where we are seeing members of the public coming out, businesses open. Basically, Kisumu is open for business today. However, even as we say this, we do know that a number of people have not come into Kisumu to open their businesses or to continue with their daily activities. While we are seeing supermarkets, banks, and other bigger outfits still working, the smaller entrepreneurs we are seeing are people who lay out their wares on the roads. They're usually allocated spaces where people can sell shoes or belts or whatever it is that they can sell so that they can be able to earn their living. Some of them have cautiously decided to stay home. Others have arrived here but have not brought their items with them or the goods that they put up for sale. There's just a general feeling of anticipation, many expecting to hear more from NASA presidential candidate Raila Amolo Odinga, who is expected to give his address at around noon. There's about 40 minutes until that happens, so many adopting a wait and see attitude so that they can see what exactly is said and what exactly the next course of action will be. I know we were able to just speak to some of the people on the streets who might not have wanted to speak on camera, but they were able to tell us that one of the areas of difficulty for many of them, although a few people, part of the town had resumed business, was the price of goods and items. Some were telling us accessing fresh groceries was becoming difficult for them, telling us a tomato now would be selling at around 20 shillings for one tomato, which they say is very expensive for them, given that they do have to feed whole families. So some of them telling us that it was important for them to return to work so they could earn some money which they could use to feed their families as they wait to see what the way forward is. So we are seeing the price of commodities, of a few commodities, especially fresh groceries, going up here, but otherwise in the central business district especially, it's very peaceful. It's largely peaceful. Even in the areas where we saw where there were issues before, in Kondele, in Manyata, people are waiting for the address so they can find out exactly what it is Raila is going to say and how it pertains to them, how it affects them, and how it might affect them in coming days. But many hoping that the situation will remain peaceful as it is, and that they will be able to go about their business, and that they will be able to support their families even as they wait to find out what the next course of action. Lilian Muli.
Thanks for that update from Kisumu County. Is Wilkista Nyabwa in sunny Kisumu, and we'll be staying with developments there. Of course, we are expecting the NASA presidential candidate who lost in the recently concluded election to give a statement or to give a press briefer later on in the day, and we'll be waiting to hear what exactly he'll be talking about. So I want to look at the immediate business environment post-elections. This was a relatively peaceful election in comparison to the past two elections, and we'll be looking at the state of the economy post-elections. With me in studio is Gen Gishinga. He's an economist, Chief Economist, Mentoria Consulting, and we're also joined by John Dua. He's an economist and researcher, Cyton Investment. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. Post-election, so this is a week after Kenyans cast their polls. I'll start with you, Ken, and we know that people have not quite resumed their normal activities. There are a lot of people who are still at home. There are a lot of people who are shying away from their workplaces for their respective reasons. How are the markets looking?
If you look at the headlines, the market's actually looking very positive. If you look at the stock market, it's actually the highest it's been in the last 22 months, since October 2015. If you look at the currency, it's actually maintained its steady rate. But that said, consumption is down. because, as you said, a lot of people are not transacting. A lot of people still, the shops are closed. A lot of people are not moving to the commercial zones of their counties. Of course, consumption and demand seems to be low, but I expect that as soon as the uncertainty of the post-election situation calms down, I expect to see the markets getting back to where they should be.
And for you, John, your assessment of the markets, are they looking positive?
Yeah, they're quite positive. Even running up to the elections, they're quite positive. Looking at the shilling, only 1.4% depreciation. The market was up 20%, higher than even last year when we had no elections. So what this tells you is that a lot of investor sentiment is quite high, and they're looking past the elections. And given that these elections, we were more prepared than we were the previous elections, given that we have an independent electoral commission who have invested a lot in terms of investor education and also setting up the processes. Judicial reforms, which we can now have more confidence in terms of the judiciary, and also in terms of market sentiment, in terms of foreign investors also having confidence in us and having a lot of international observers with us. It tells you that our economy is quite strong and they have quite a large confidence in our economy.
Right.
Yeah.
And looking at previous election cycles, like I had said, when you look at the immediate business environment and what you're seeing borrowing from the previous election cycles, this was a relatively peaceful election. Would you attribute that to the fact that we're still seeing the market being as stable as it is?
If you look at it historically, Kenya's economic trajectory has always gone in 5-year cycles because of the election uncertainty. Right, beginning from 1992 to 1997, if you map out the economic growth map, you only see election years always taking a dip, partly because of the uncertainty that accompanies election violence, all these things that come together. I think right now it's fair to say that Kenya is becoming a mature constitutional democracy. We have a new constitution that mandates that elections take place every second Tuesday of August. Those kind of things give an economy what we call predictability, and investors love predictability, that it's very clear when elections will be, it's very clear how long terms will be, it's very clear how many terms a presidential candidate. These are the things we never used to have back in the 90s, and even in the 2013, you remember we had an election, that election date of March 4th had to be determined by the Supreme Court. So I think we are finally getting to a place where we are becoming what we call a predictable economy, and I think that's very good for investor confidence. So I expect to see, I don't think we'll see the nervousness that we saw in 2007, but still, as you said, we are expecting a big statement from the leader of the opposition. That might have a shock on the market, depending on what exactly he says. So I think it's still a wait and see among a lot of investors, but most people seem to be fairly optimistic.
And it's a wait and see, John, even among Kenyans, a lot of people still at home, a lot of people shying away from their workplaces. Is this a temporary challenge, and how is this likely to affect the markets and economic performance?
I'd like to say it's a temporary challenge, but it's also a historical challenge, given that people we have this confidence that's going to go on well, but we also have these historical issues at the back of our minds, so we have to take a wait-and-see approach. But given that we are more mature now as a country, and we also have to give it to the IEBC, they've really mapped out the whole electoral process, and also we look more prepared to investors, and we look more certain in terms of every outcome and every step that we're going to take moving forward. So I believe that, yes, people are scared a bit and there are uncertainties around what's going to happen, even given the announcement by Raila. But what I expect is that the market is only going to be down for a short period, but is going to continue to rally. And this is due to the fact that we have set up processes and procedures in that we know, and also external investors know what's going to happen next.
So I hear you attributing a lot of the resilience in the economy to the IEBC and how it carried out this entire exercise. What lessons can be learned going forward during election cycles regarding the whole electoral process, and how ultimately it could affect investor faith in our markets, and indeed, as well as the common wananchi and their contribution in terms of keeping the economy afloat, John?
John Ken.
Okay.
Well, I think back to voter education still. I think IEBC still need to explain to Kenyans how a smooth election cycle and a smooth political cycle always foster positive economic growth. I think one of the challenges that the IEBC might have had was that they had a very short term. The commissioners had a very short term in office. So a lot of things had to be rushed through. What I'd like to see in 2022 is beginning from 2021 to see just a lot of conversations around the whole voter cycle, the whole registration cycle. I think that reduces the maybe level of confusion, which inspires confidence. But I think from my perspective, and from the observer's perspective, it seems that they did a fairly credible job, and I think that's why we are seeing markets reacting the way they are.
And to you, John, now, the ripple effect, fears of the ripple effect of businessmen staying home and people staying away from the economic hub. So the ripple effect of this in the long term, we're looking at uncertain times. A lot of people have chosen to shy away from their businesses, and also looking at the fact that during this whole electoral process, there was very minimal supply of basic commodities such as milk, vegetables, groceries, markets were closed, and for those that were open, prices were extremely high. So the ripple effect of this.
Okay, as much as the demand is low and also the supply is low, we might expect some form of inflation, but this demand driven, not fundamentally driven by something like drought. But we might expect this to persist in the near term, but once businesses take root, it's going to stabilize in the short term. It's not something that is fundamentally wrong with the economy. It's just that people are not supplying to these areas. People are just jittery about the whole situation. But in terms of the ripple effect, if this thing continues for a long period, then it might affect the economy. But we do not predict that. We don't foresee that. We foresee this to be a short-term thing before everything is settled, and then once the business starts running normally, then the economy is going to pick up.
So, Ken, you're echoing John's sentiments here that there's not likely to be a ripple effect. Of course, we're counting down now to the swearing in, and between this time, you still see people shying away from their respective areas of activity, economic activity. We do know that in some supermarkets, supply is extremely low on certain commodities, basic commodities. Do you see this having a ripple effect?
Absolutely. I think I beg to differ with John, because I feel that it's too early to make a call. We're still not very clear whether a petition will be filed in the Supreme Court challenging the elections, and if that does, that creates a whole spanner of uncertainty in the works. So I think it's still very early to say that everything is behind us. There's still a lot more that's going to happen, maybe before August 29th, which is the inauguration date. So I think right now a lot of people are not taking positions, because for them we are 70% there, but you're not 100% there. So we're still going to see a lot of shops remaining closed, especially in what we call the hotspots areas, where anytime violence could erupt. And I think those are the things that are going to challenge. So I think it's still very early for us to make that final call. But I agree with John, is that the way things are going, it's likely that we are going to get to that economic heaven that we are trying to get much sooner rather than later.
Let's talk about the results of the elections and the implications for the country's growth, John, potentially surrounding areas around Kenyan industries like agriculture and manufacturing. The outcome of this election, the winner of the election, of course, being Uhuru Kenyatta, who has been re-elected for a second term. Looking at the country's growth and the fact that in his acceptance speech he spoke about continuing with the work that they have started as a duo, him and his deputy. Your assessment of the direction the country is headed under the leadership of President Uhuru Kenyatta, who, like I said, said that he would continue with the work that they started. We also know about projects under the Jubilee mantle, such as the SGR, the LAPSET as well.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say that it's not something synonymous with the current government. This is a blueprint in terms of the Vision 2030, which they are currently following. So regardless of who came into power, they're still going to follow the same footprint. But Kenyan economy for the past few years have been driven by infrastructural development. And if the government continues implementing this strategy, then Kenya's economy is going to grow at the 5% it has been growing for the past few years. Kenya's economy grows faster than even sub-Saharan economies, combining all African countries. What does it tell you? That we are at a development stage where any infrastructural development has a trickle-down effect on the basic fundamentals of the economy. And one thing that's unique about Kenya is that we are diversified, and we are moving away from over-reliance from agriculture. So if the government puts in place structures and measures... Is
this necessarily a good thing, moving away from over-reliance on agriculture?
It is a good thing, because if you consider the fact that the first quarter of this year, our GDP was the slowest for the past 5 years, and this was driven by the drought, which further affects agriculture. And that's given that agriculture controls a significant point of our economy. So if there is a significant shock on agriculture, then our economy suffers. So if we diversify away from agriculture into other sectors, more services sector, more manufacturing, more real estate, then we might find that as long as one sector is hurting, the other come and support these sectors. So the government should work in terms of creating a diversified environment where each sector can thrive. So I believe this government is going to put in place, and whichever government will come in, they're going to put in place measures and processes that are going to create a conducive business environment for Kenya.
So to you, Ken, how will the outcome of this election determine Kenya's economic course, the re-election of the incumbent?
That's a good question. I think we have to go back over the last 5 years to see what direction has Kenya taken. If you look at Kenya in the Kibaki era, we relied a lot on relationships with the West. Then when President Uhuru came in, we saw a big shift towards East, where Kenya was starting to engage heavily with China. China was giving Kenya huge loans to put together the standard gauge railway, LAPSET, all the major highways. Most of these things have been financed by the Chinese government. Actually, now China is the largest lender to Kenya. It's overtaken Japan, it's overtaken the West. So I think that has been the dramatic shift that's happened over the last 5 years. Now, what does that mean? China, of course, has unveiled what they call the new grand strategy, the strategy of the century. Well, I think they call it the Silk Road strategy, which is China being at the center of the economic universe and looping in countries like Kenya, countries in Europe, countries in Asia. So I think from that perspective, Kenya becomes a very strategic cog, and I think it's going to be a continuation of that type of conversation. I expect to see more loans coming from China. That's what will be servicing the next phase of the standard gauge railway into Kisumu, into Malaba. I expect to see a lot more infrastructure coming in. What does that mean about debt? Because that's the alternative conversation. Does the country end up taking on too much debt? I think the Treasury has been very clear that they're going to stick on the 50% of GDP in terms of debt. Sometimes they go beyond that, they go to 53%, but I think they've tried to make sure they don't go at least beyond 55%. So in terms of your question, what does this really mean for Kenya? I think it means more infrastructure. I think it means better debt management. They need to have a much better debt management framework.
Which the administration has been heavily criticized.
Precisely. I think they need to really beef up the debt management office like other countries have. Many other countries, the Treasury Department is a whole unit of the debt management oversight. So I think that's where we are going to go. What does this mean for jobs? I think that might help the manufacturing sector. Because I think that's where cheaper power is needed, that's where better access to railway is needed, better access to roads. So I think from the business owner's perspective, Kenya is going to do well. My big worry...
The concern is, and with the hunger phenomenon, we know now there is no shortage, and indeed the prices have stabilized. But the concern for the common mwananchi is that while industrialization takes center stage and seems to be a priority for this administration, the common mwananchi still continues to suffer from the cost of living. The cost of living is extremely too high in this country, and that doesn't seem to be anywhere near changing. Absolutely.
And in economics, there are two factors that contribute to growth. There's what we call capital and labor. I think President Kenyatta's administration has looked at the capital side, infrastructure, mechanization, but the labor question, I think, is the area where he's been lagging behind.
And yet,
which is
John, you would assume that while industrialization and manufacturing have taken center stage, that there for them there would be jobs available for this common Mwananchi who continues to struggle with a high cost of living.
Unfortunately, it's not something that will happen immediately, so it will take a longer period, and that's why my friend is saying he's taking the capital route. If you take the capital route, this labor will come later. But if you prioritize labor, then capital will come later. So you have to choose one or create a balance between the two. So since you have taken the infrastructure route, the capital route, then the labor route will come much later.
Okay, and I'll get your final comments as we close. Because you've talked about local and foreign investors actually still having faith in the market and therefore continuing to invest. So that's not a concern. Of course, the outcome of this election we do know already has gone in favor of Uhuru Kenyatta. Your final comments as regards the state of the economy in the next 4 years, maybe a projection, just looking at a year, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, but your projection this year, and we're counting from August to August next year. Let's get your parting remarks, Ken.
I think they've always talked about double digits growth. And I think what they've realized is you can have jobless growth, as you've rightly pointed out. You can have major developments on the capital side, but people feel the cost of living might be too high. Some people might feel they're left behind by income inequality. So I think the second administration of President Uhuru Kenyatta has to look at the labor question in terms of the rights of workers, in terms of union rights, in terms of collective bargaining agreements with the doctors, the teachers, all these things. I think.
Yeah, and that's a good. Actually, I'm glad you raised that, because the previous administration, which is now coming back, was battled with industrial unrest, a lot of industrial unrest, particularly surrounding unpaid salaries.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So I think that has to be in the first 100 days of the president's term. I think he really has to focus on what can we do for the ordinary Mwananchi. Yes, these big infrastructure projects can yield future jobs, but those jobs could be very high-paying jobs, which the ordinary Mwananchi does not even qualify for. So how do we get education right? How do we get healthcare right, so that people can climb the ladder, the social ladder, to be able to access those high-quality jobs that manufacturing brings. Manufacturing just doesn't hire anybody. It requires a certain level of skill and stuff. So does our education system, the TVET, technical vocational education, can it produce people who, once the Chinese leave, Kenyans can continue servicing the SGR? That has to be the social question that I think the advisors of the president will have to look at. Right,
and your final comments, John, the trickle-down effect. You say the economy is stable, but the trickle-down effect, even as we look at gains, with the Jubilee administration in terms of industrialization and what have you, the trickle-down effect to the common Mwananchi.
Okay, our economy is very strong, and there's no doubt about that. But Kenya has an issue in terms of all this wealth trickling down to the common Mwananchi. If you look at even unemployment, we are lagging behind our counterparts in Uganda and Tanzania. Yet our economy is the larger of the three. When you look at the Human Development Index, we are in the bottom of the pyramid. Yet we are supposed to be a middle-income economy. So what that tells you is that we have a lot of people, or the top cream have a lot of money, and the one below don't have a lot of money. So we do the average, it looks like we're a middle-income economy, but the masses don't have money. So what the administration needs to focus is on how all this wealth in terms of the country is creating, how will it trickle down to the common Mwananchi? Because if they don't administer that, then we might continue seeing all this civil unrest year in, year out. But in terms of prediction, in terms of the next year and maybe the next 4 years, our economy will continue doing well. But will our social welfare and human development index be the same? I don't think so if they don't solve that issue.
Thank you for your time and for your thoughts. We've been talking to John Dura, who's an economist and researcher with Fulton Investment, and we're also joined by Ken Gishinga, who is a chief economist at Mentoria